In this video, we'll be going over our new dialog service. Hello and welcome to this video. Today we'll be going over the dialog service that can be found in the Stacked Services package. The dialog service makes use of the get package to expose functionality for you to show the dialogues from your view model where you don't have the build context. This video will go over the basic usage of the dialog service, how to set it up, as well as providing a custom UI for your dialog. And as always, you can head over to FilledStacks.com if this video is too fast for you, where you can go over the full written tutorial. For this video, we'll have a starting project which you can download from that written tutorial. This has all of the code that we've built in the rest of the series leading up to this point. Now this code is not required. I'm just using it because it'll be faster than rewriting a new code base just to show off the specific functionality. Once you have downloaded the code, you can open it up in Visual Studio Code. Let's quickly go over the stacked services so that you can know what it's all about. The stacked services provides you with 3 foundational services to be used within the stacked MVVM style architecture: the navigation service, dialog service, and the snack bar service. These services are all thin wrappers on top of the get package, which provides a great contextless setup already. For any of these services to work, get requires the navigation key to be set. This key has to be set only once, and all 3 of the services expose the exact same get key. This means if you've already set it for the navigation service, then you don't require any setup. But if you're only going to be using the dialog service or the snack bar service, then you have to set that key in your main file. We'll go over that a bit later if it sounds confusing, so you'll see what I mean. The next thing I want to mention is that the services should be injected into your view models or retrieved through a service locator. In our case, we are using getit for that purpose. Getit is pretty simple, so I'm using the injectable package which generates all this code, but if you simply have the normal setup locator function that I've shown in my other videos, all you have to do is call register lazy singleton and you supply the dialog service that we'll be using, and that is the end of your registration. And if you are using the injectable package to register the services, then all you have to do is create a new file called third-party services module.dart. Then inside it, create a new abstract class called third-party services module. Then you annotate that class with an @module annotation from injectable. You add your third-party services with the annotation @lazy singleton. Then you can go ahead and run the Flutter pub run build runner build, and then pass in the delete conflicting outputs flag as well. This will generate the config file for your locator, which will contain all of your service registrations with getit. Since we already have everything set up, all you have to do is add the setup locator function call before you call run app, and then for the navigator key, we'll get the dialog service from the locator and supply the navigator key to the navigation key. If you look at the definition of this key, all it does is gets the key from the get package. If you look at the definition from the navigation service, it does the same thing. That is why I said if you set it for one of the services, you don't need to set it for the other service. Just to keep it consistent for this tutorial, we'll use the dialog service and set the key on that because that is what we are using. If you open up the dialog example view.dart file, you'll see that I've built a very basic UI which allows you to show the basic dialog, show a confirmation dialog, and show a custom dialog. If you run the code, you will see a view show up with the buttons that I just described, as well as some text underneath it to show us the results that come back from our dialog requests. Let's start with a show basic dialog. Go to the dialog example view model where we will get our dialog service and make use of it. At the top of the file, create a new final field called dialog service, and we'll get the dialog service from the locator. Then in the show basic dialog function, we will await the call on the dialog servers to show dialog. This takes in a title, which we'll set to the basic dialog. It takes in a description, which we'll set to this is the description for the dialog that shows up under the title. Then we'll supply it a button title as well, just so we can see how that looks in the dialog. And if you go over to the app that is running on the right side and click on show basic dialog, it'll show you your basic dialog. The dialog service is platform specific, but if you want a specific style, you can pass in the dialog platform enum of Cupertino or material, and it will show the one that you have passed in. If you don't pass in any value, it will show a Cupertino dialog on the iOS devices, and it will show a material dialog on the Android devices. The next thing to go over is the fact that the dialog service returns a response to you once you have closed your dialog. This dialog response can contain a boolean, title confirmed, or response data, which is a list of dynamic values. So when you supply a cancel title to this dialog request, there will be a cancel button on the dialog. Next up, we'll just print out the value for confirmed from the dialog response. The reason that we are doing a null check before printing out confirmed is because when you dismiss that dialog, the response will be null instead of a response value. There was a bug that I encountered in the dialog service. As you see, it prints out this message, and so this actually gives you a bit of insight into the background of how I do these videos. Is that when I find a problem, I have to still go and update the package and then make sure that it works, and then I get back to recording the video, which is why sometimes it takes longer than a week or 2 weeks to make the video. So at this point, I went into the stacked services and updated the dialog service and then published that, and then came back to the video. So when we pass in a cancel title, it will now show up on the dialog with a red title styling to indicate that it's the cancel button. If it's pressed, the dialog response will set the confirmed value to false and pass that back to you. The same goes for the main title, which will pass back the true value. And if you show the dialog and you press the back button, nothing would have been set, so that value would be null. This means you have the opportunity to handle the response from the user easily right where your business logic is being created. By default, a dialog cannot be dismissed by tapping outside of the dialog, but if you pass in the barrier dismissal value and set that to true, that will be possible, which also will make your response confirmed value return null. That's it for the basic dialog. The confirmation dialog makes use of the exact same function internally. The only reason that I've created it is so that it reads better in the code when you are using it. It makes sense to read that it is a confirmation dialog being shown. It also has better naming for the properties, which allows it to be more understandable when slumped into a lot of other business logic where you can easily get confused with what this dialog is doing. So for this function, instead of button title, we have confirmation title, which gives you a clear indication of what will be returned when that button is tapped. And we also have the cancel title. Everything else is the same, which I won't go over. All we'll do is we will set the confirmed value equal to the confirmation result, and then call notify listener so that when tapped, the UI is updated to show the response from the confirmation dialog. Now we can move on to the meat of this tutorial, which is the custom dialog functionality. So because I didn't want any UI in the view models, I have set it up so that you can register a custom dialog builder separately, which will be called when you call the show custom dialog functionality. Go to the UI folder where we will create a new file called setup dialog UI. Inside this file, we'll create a new function called setup dialog UI. The first thing that we will do in this function is create a variable called dialog service and get the dialog service from the locator. Then on that dialog service, we will call a function called register custom dialog UI. This takes in a build context and a dialog request. The function expects you to return a widget. In our case, we will return a dialog widget. The child of that dialog we will set to a container. Now, I'm not a big fan of building UIs in my video because there's multiple tutorials for that out there. So I'll quickly go over what styling we are adding to this container so that you can also match it. Or you can go to the written tutorial, which I recommend, and copy the style for this dialog directly from the written tutorial. We'll set the padding for all sides equal to 20. Then we'll provide a box decoration with color white and a border radius of 10. And then for the child of the container, we will set that equal to a column. The first child in that column will be text that shows the title from the dialog request. For the style of that title, we will set the font weight to bold and give it a font size of 23. Then we will set a sized box with a height of 10 to provide some spacing. And after that, we will create another text widget and pass in the description value from the dialog request. For the style of the description, we'll simply set the font size to 18. We'll set the text alignment to center. Then we'll add another sized box spacing, but this time with a height of 20. And then we'll add a container which will act as our button. For the child of this container, we will check a value on the dialog request called show icon in main button. And if that is true, we will return an icon widget with the checkbox icon as the widget data. And if that value is false, we will return a text widget with the text set to the main button title. We'll set the alignment of the container to center, and then we'll give it a padding of vertical space of 10 pixels. And we will set the width to double.infinity to ensure that it takes up all of the space in the container on the horizontal axis. Then we'll supply it with a box decoration with a color and use the red accent as the color, and we'll also give it a border radius of 5. Then we can go over to the main file where we can now call the setup dialog UI to make sure that it's registered before the application starts running. When that's done, we can head back over to our dialog example view model. Then we will create a new variable called response, which will be set to the value from the show custom dialog function called on the dialog service. If you look at this function's signature, you'll see that there's quite a lot of information that can be passed in. This information is directly passed to your builder function for your custom dialog in the form of a dialog request. So for us, we will pass in a title called my custom dialog. We will also pass in a description with some text so that we can see that under the title. And then we'll pass in the main button title as confirm. If you click on show custom dialog now, you will see a very ugly dialog on the screen, but it is built directly from the code that you supplied in the setup dialog UI. To fix the column taking up the full height that it can, all we'll do is set the main axis size equal to main axis size.min. Then we can move on to the container tap not doing anything. We'll wrap our container in a gesture detector. Then we'll supply an onTap anonymous function. This function will call the dialog service and call the complete dialog function on that service. This function takes in a dialog response, which is the same response that we dealt with in the basic dialog. And now we can pass back a dialog response with confirmed set to true. If you rerun the code and restart the application, when you tap on show custom dialog and click on confirm, you'll see that the dialog now closes and it passes back the dialog response. We can confirm that by adding a print statement in the show custom dialog function. And in this print statement, we will print out the confirmed value from the custom response. So open up the debug console where you'll then see the custom response printing out true. And if you close the dialog without tapping that button, it will return null. So a common question that I've been asked is, how do you show a dialog that takes in some text and returns that to your caller? So I'll quickly show you how to use the custom data property on the dialog servers to build different UIs based on the value passed into that custom data property. So I like to use enums for things like this. So we'll create a new folder called enum, and inside we'll create a new file called dialog type. Then we can create a new enum called dialog type. It will have two values, basic and form. Then you can go over to the setup dialog UI file, where we will cut the child of the dialog, which is all of the container, and we'll put that into a new stateless widget. We will create a stateless widget and call that _basic custom dialog. Then for the body of the build function, we will paste all of the container code that we had just cut from the setup dialog function. We will add a new final dialog request parameter, which will be called dialog request. And then we will also create a new final function that takes in a type of dialog response called onDialogTap. This callback function and the dialog request will be passed through the basic custom dialog constructor. Then for the onTap function in the gesture detector, we will now change that to make use of the new onDialogTap function that has been passed. Next up, we'll create a new function that returns a widget called custom dialog UI. This function will take a parameter of type dialog request that we'll call dialog request. It will also take a callback function that will have a argument of dialog response. We'll call that onDialogTap. The first thing we'll do is determine the dialog type. We'll create a new variable called dialog type, which will be set to the custom data property on the dialog request, casted as a dialog type. Then we will switch on that dialog type, and for the default case we will return the basic custom dialog. We will pass in the dialog request as it is passed in through the custom dialog UI, and we'll do the same for the onDialogTap function. We will also use the same custom dialog for the basic case. Then we can complete our code. In the register custom dialog UI, the child of that dialog will now be determined by calling the custom dialog UI function, which will return our basic custom dialog. We will pass in the dialog request, and for the callback function, we will simply call the dialog servers and call the complete dialog and pass back the dialog response created by the custom dialog. So just to quickly go over the implementation to show you that you can have a recap. When we call register custom dialog UI, it will pass the dialog request into the custom dialog, where we will check the custom data property. If it is basic or anything else, we return the basic custom dialog. So all we have to do to add a new dialog type is to add a new case statement and then create a new widget to be called from the custom dialog UI. When you want to return a value, all you have to do is call the onDialogTap function within your dialog and pass a dialog response back. As you can see, the dialog still works the same way that we did previously, but now we have a space where we can create multiple dialog UIs. Copy the entire basic custom dialog stateless widget and we'll change it to form custom dialog. We'll keep the title the same. We'll increase the space for the sized box to 20 and we'll replace the description with a text field. We'll need a controller for the text field, which requires a stateful widget, but I don't want to use a stateful widget, so we'll change our form custom dialog into a hook widget. Then we will get our controller by using the use text editing controller hook. This will always give us back the exact same controller and will maintain its state throughout the build calls. We can pass that controller to our text field, and then For the onDialog tab, where we create our dialog response, instead of passing back confirm, we'll now pass in a list of data to response data using the text from the controller. Next thing to do is to add a new case to the custom dialog function, and we'll do the case for the form dialog type. When it is a form, we will return the form custom dialog and pass in the dialog request as well as the onDialog tab function. Now you can head back to the dialog example view model, where we will change the printing out of the confirmed boolean and print out the response data instead. Then we'll just update our information so that it matches a dialog that will have a text form on it. We'll change our title to please enter your password. There's no more description, so we'll change that, and then we'll change the main button title to submit. And to indicate that we want to show the form dialog, we'll pass in dialog type.form to the custom data property. When you run the code now, make sure that you open up your debug console, since we want to see the response data being passed back from the show custom dialog. Click on that, we enter some text, and when we press submit, when you go to your debug console, you should see the information being printed out as the response. And that is everything that I would like to share about the dialog service at this moment. This removes the dialog manager from our UI part and simply relies on the dialog service and the get package for the functionality. Just a quick run over of creating a custom dialog. We get the dialog service, and then we call register custom dialog UI, where we pass in a builder function that returns a widget. This function gives us a dialog request, which we can use to check the custom data property and then return different widgets based on that property type. And that is all you need to create a custom dialog UI. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.